Welcome to BTS, Bylaws Treasurer Secretaries Forum, brought to you by the ARIA Chapter Development Committee. And now presenting Mr. James Wong, 2020 ARIA National Chair.
Thank you, Charles. Welcome, 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 everyone. This program has been in production for a very long time, and I'm really proud to be here to represent Tom Trong's actually very hard work of having the vision and foresight of understanding that as ARIA kept on growing and just changing and evolving, that it got more complex, and it was so important to start putting systems and policies and plans and things together so we can be more efficient to really grow ARIA, so we can do all the fun things that we like to do, is throw events, meet new people, get sponsors, service our members. And I just like to take this time to thank everyone for continuously grow ARIA. And I always say 17,000 members, but I know we're a lot bigger than that. And with great systems and policies and procedures put in place, we can grow, as Tom Trong said, to 100,000 to 1 million around the world. So I would love to introduce my president, Tom Trong, to the stage to introduce and tell the story of how this all came about. Thank you, Tom.
Jim, you've got a lot of pent-up excitement sitting at home with COVID-19, brother. I love it. Thank you so much to our 2020 National President, Jim Huang, my very good friend. Leaders, there's now almost 100 of you on the call. I want to let you know that I want to thank all of you for setting time aside to be with us today as we talk about national bylaws, right? Listen, this has been 2 years in the making, and maybe even further before that, but we finally formalized the process. And I want to thank Brian on last year's chapter development chair, Charles Schwansberg, this year's chair, and then Elena Lau, next year's chair, to basically spearhead this along with the committees that have been working so long and hard since last year, this year, and there's more work to do going forward with all of you leaders, right? My passion for ARIA has always been from day one, about 7 or so years ago, when I found this organization, to make sure that when I got involved in a leadership position like all of you are today, to make ARIA the best Asian American Pacific Islander community, make the best organization on planet Earth. That should be our goal, right? And as I think about how we're gonna roll out these national bylaws and how we're all gonna work together to make ARIA the best AAPI organization out there on planet Earth, I think about some of the values, some of the core values that are important to me and I think are important to you and I hope resonate with you. Number one is a value of community, to be able to come together, to be able to serve as one, all right, to be on the same page. And then number two is to make sure that ARIA is sustainable, that we continue to stay at 17,000 and continue to grow. And by having bylaws that are consistent with our values and consistent among within chapters, among national, that we all speak and share the same language, the same sentiments, that will also make us grow and make us stay sustainable, okay? Take the eyes and take our eyes off of the minds of the minutia of running the day-to-day business of running a chapter. I remember serving at the local chapter where sometimes chapter leaders get caught up with, like I said, minutia, with stuff that really didn't service our community. The things that we caught up with were, how to do elections, how long is my term, where do I file taxes, when do I file taxes, how do systems work? And when our time is consumed with that stuff, it takes our time away from what we all join ARIA to do. Why we give up our time, why we give up our energy, is to give back to our community. That spirit of service goes from being fun to being not so fun, okay? And I believe having these universal bylaws will also strengthen our bench, right? You guys are the upcoming leaders, okay? And when we have consistency in a process, there is integrity. That's another value that I cherish a lot, okay? And transparency. When we all know what we are working towards, how elections happen, how to run a chapter. And when we go to leadership, when we're able to come together again in person to talk about leadership, when a local chapter president of one chapter talks to another chapter president, and we have the same rules and engagement plans, rules of engagement, then it makes the business of running our organization and growing our organization a lot better. Okay. Now remember, what we're rolling out today, you have up to 1 year to implement. It's not set in stone right now, so don't panic, right? We know that changes are tough, and we also understand that we're rolling this out for the first time on a national level, and that ARIA needs to stay agile. We need to continue to shift and make adaptations if we find that some of the things that this committee has worked on so hard might not work so well in the field, right? So know that we can be agile, and we have national leadership and chapter development leadership to listen to your comments, your feedback as we start to execute and to implement. And most importantly for me is to have fun, right? We all give of our time, energy, and resources to come together as one unified voice to drive our ARIA mission. And without fun, we don't show up, we don't come back, and we don't take time away from everything else that's happening in the world, right? And so today, let's have a lot of fun. Help me, help our leadership execute this awesome plan that we're about to roll out. I'm gonna hand this back over to two upcoming leaders that you guys want to be on the lookout for. Two, I believe, national leaders to watch out for, and that is Narhi and Jasmine. Over to you guys.
Thank you, Tom. I am so excited to be here. We have an amazing session today. We have, as Tom mentioned, unveiling of the bylaws and many takeaway points for our current and future leaders in the secretarial and the treasury roles. I encourage all of you to stay engaged, ask questions. And now I'd like to introduce to you another member of our CDC. She has practiced real estate, bankruptcy, and business law for over 16 years. She is currently our Greater Sacramento Chapter VP, and that is Jasmine Nguyen Esquire.
Oh, thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure. Being a part of ARIA has been one of the best things that I've done in my career. And definitely this program has been a long time in the making, and we're hoping that it will be useful and you know, leave a sort of lasting legacy to the following members of ARIA. I'd like now to introduce another attorney, Ken Avellino, and he is the ARIA National Counsel. And also we are very fortunate because he's in the Sacramento area, so he's on the advisory for Sacramento chapter as well.
Hello, everyone. Again, like Tom and Jasmine said, this is a long time coming. This is a great achievement, I think, from Tom's leadership, Hope and her staff, and the chapter development team. So this is a great accomplishment to have a model bylaws for all the chapters. Jasmine, are you going over the bylaws, or is it Hope?
I think Hope is, right?
Okay.
Yes, Hope will.
Okay, so David, can you turn off your, sorry, David and I are sharing. All right. Hey, Jessica. Okay, thank you. So thank you everyone for joining the call. If I haven't met you yet, my name is Hope Atwell, and I'm the Executive Director here at ARIA. I'm sure I've met most of you, if not all of you. And as Tom had said, it's been the bylaw revamp has been something that we've been wanting to do in the last 4 or 5 years. And Tom had the vision to appoint chapter development last year with Brian On and Charles, and also Don Choi. I think there is quite a number of folks who are on this call who've also been involved in the revised bylaw changes. And so, Vanessa, are you on the call? I think you are. We're going to actually play tag team on covering what the changes are to the bylaws. And so what I did was to highlight really the major changes to the chapter bylaws that we can go over. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions, and we want to make sure that we allow for ample time for questions from the board. So you see here on the screen that there's 7 sections that are major highlights for the chapter bylaws that have just been recently approved by the executive board yesterday. One of them is the annual meetings. So some of the chapters already do this. I know Sacramento, Ken's chapter, and Jasmine's chapter already do this, where they actually host annual meetings for the entire members. And we are requiring this now for all of the chapters so that there's transparency on the state of your chapter. The annual meetings it can be held anytime during the year. What we are suggesting is you would do this at an event that draws the largest number of attendance for your members. I think typically it's the gala. It probably would be a little bit weird to have an annual meeting during the gala. So probably pick another event, whether it's for Boston. Boston, I think one of your events that draw a large crowd is your boat tour, right? Your summer boat cruise. Maybe that. It doesn't have to be a long drawn meeting. It can be as short as a 20-30 minute meeting that will include very basics, the state of your chapter, how you are doing financially, right? The number of members that you have, how many events, and more importantly, the second bullet point is the election of board of directors. What we are suggesting, and Ken, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is something that your chapter is already doing, is holding board of director elections in conjunction with your annual meeting. This makes the board of director elections open to the entire active membership base, and it also makes your board of director elections very transparent to the entire members. So I'll pause at Jessica and Charles. How did you want to do Q&A? Do you want Q&A afterwards, or do you want Q&A while we're having each of the section?
I'm thinking afterward.
Right, a combination. There'll be probably a lot of Q&A from
okay, that's silence. That means move forward, right? Okay, so board of director elections, again, this is something that is going to be very different for a lot of the chapters because it's going to then involve all of your active members, right? And so you know your active members as chapter board members, as chapter presidents, you know who your active members are. Probably a question that will be asked of this is, well, how can we hold annual meetings and elections during COVID? I know Ken will be addressing this during the Q&A on what the requirements are for kind of like electronic elections, which will actually include either a DocuSign document for your ballots or something that is faxed. Another thing that we've come across quite often is the inconsistencies with board term limits, right? So some chapters have a 10-year term limit when it comes to the board. I don't know that somebody would want to serve 10 years, but I know some chapters have that in their bylaws, right? Some chapter bylaws surprisingly have no term limits, which, you know, somebody could serve in perpetuity. I don't know that somebody would want to serve in perpetuity. Maybe somebody would want to serve in perpetuity. So what we're suggesting and actually making a change to the bylaws is that each term is 2 years. And chapter board members then would have a maximum of, Jessica and Vanessa, correct me if I'm wrong, and Ken, a maximum of 2 consecutive terms that you can serve, which is a maximum of 4 years. And then you can take a rest, then you can serve again. That gives, that allows for board members to take a break if they want to. It also allows for just, kind of like fresh new board members that can cycle out every 4 years or so. So that's a big change to the chapter bylaws, is the consistency on term limits for board. Another area that we thought, again, would be consistent throughout is the succession between vice president and president. Most of the chapter bylaws have it on their bylaws, and it still is on this current revised bylaws, that the vice president will succeed the president after the president, right, after the president terms out. However, what we are inserting in this particular bylaw, revised bylaw, is that the board needs to ratify the vice president before he or she succeeds the president. There have been some instances when it's confusing, does the vice president run again for president and all of that stuff? Not necessarily, right? Because as vice president, the language on the bylaw says the vice president succeeds the president. However, what we are inserting is the board then just needs to ratify that, which means they don't need to get elected again, but the board just needs to officially give the green light to the vice president as he or she moves up as president. The next thing too is clarity on the president's voting rights. This is something that I think Ken is going to go over as far as how the president should be voting. It's on Robert's Rules of Order already that the president would be casting his or her vote during a tie. So it's already implied on the bylaws because that is on Robert's Rules of Order. However, we want to make sure that everybody understands it, and for the sake of clarity, it is written in the bylaws. So you're going to see that on two instances, one on kind of like, I think, chapter board, and then there's a section between, there's a section that says tie vote when the chapter actually will require the president to cast his or her vote so that it could break a tie. Then the next area that we are making, I would say, significant changes to is the removal proceedings for a board member, because this has been inconsistent with what we have seen from chapter to chapter, right? There are some chapter bylaws that the president has the ultimate authority to remove a board member. That can be problematic, right? Because that you're not getting the consensus from the board. There's also some inconsistencies on does it require, 60% of the vote? Is it 100% and all of that stuff? So what we've changed on this particular version of the bylaws is that removal proceedings must be done by the entire board, not just the executive board, but the entire board. What we're also inserting as far as clarity on the language is that a board of director is going to be removed for a specific reason. And Ken's going to address this as well on what that particular language is. So I'm going to pause at that. I know there's a lot of stuff that I just kind of like rattled. So I want to make sure that we pause for ample Q&A. Okay, so question here from Cindy. Some chapters may have president-elect. How would that work? Shall the title only VPs? Yes, and Cindy, thank you for pointing that out. By virtue of the title, the vice president is actually the president-elect, right? Because that just means that they're elected as president, they're going to be moving up as the next president. So I think when you see the new chapter bylaws, you're going to see the composition of the board, and it actually outlines the titles. So it would be president, vice president, immediate past president, I think, or immediate president, or yeah, immediate past president, treasurer, and secretary. Okay, so next question, president votes only when breaking a tie. Yes, Raina. The president, it's going to be very clear when you get the bylaws that the president will only cast a vote to break a tie. All right, next question here. If a vice president steps down, how would the new president get elected? The chapter would need a new vice president and president. Yes, so Rory, in that instance, you will need to have a special election. If the vice president steps down, let's just say mid-year, right, you would then need to have a special election to presumably then elect a new president. Okay, so Jasmine asks, Greater Sacramento chapter has 2 vice presidents. That will change too, because what we're suggesting in this new bylaws is 1 vice president. Okay, sorry, I can't keep up with the questions. Does the board term only apply to directors? Yes, but by virtue of being an officer, you need to be a director first before you can actually move up as an officer. So the officers are actually board of directors as well. Okay. Jessica just confirmed we cap terms to 3 terms max before needing. Okay, so yeah, sorry, we were going back and forth. So 3 terms is actually 6 years. Thank you, Jessica, for confirming that. When do you want us to implement these changes? Okay, so Charles and chapter development, what you had approved based on your minutes is that full implementation of the new chapter bylaws would be completed by January of 2022. So essentially it's half of this year to a full 2021 to make sure that we factor in, current terms and all of that stuff. So January of 2022 is full implementation. Okay, clarify on how someone could run for board positions. All right, so this is a great question, and I'm glad, Dan, that you're asking this question. Is each year before your annual elections, you're going to open it up. You're going to open up an application for running for board of directors, however many positions or seats that you have. So an active member could presumably then run as a board of director. Hopefully that answers your question. So it's going to be open to all active members.
Can you hear me?
All right. Is the 2-year president the term 2-year president mandatory? No, actually it's not. It's based on the bylaws. It's only a 1-year term. Keith, you have a question. Does the number of members in a chapter dictate the number of board positions outside of the executive board members? No, the number of members, the composition of the board of directors, we're saying is at least your officers, right? At least your officers, which would be 5 individuals, and then at least 6 additional board of directors, which would make it 11. So at a minimum, a chapter would need to have 11 board members, Keith. Christina, can we grandfather decisions made prior to this? The grandfathering would be applicable, Christina, at least for a year, and then we would all need to be, all of the chapters then would need to fully comply with the current bylaws by 2022. JC, you have a question. Will 2020 presidents roll over to be the 2021 president since 2020 has not been a normal year? That's a great question. You know, unfortunately, you don't get a mulligan, right? Unless the chapter board feels that, okay, we're re-electing you as the president. Take a look at your bylaws, right? What does your current bylaw say regarding presidents? If you can exercise a 2-year term, that's fine. But just because we're sort of like in this shelter in place mode doesn't mean that it's an extension of your presidency. So yeah, unfortunately, we don't get a mulligan. Henry, will the term limits be retroactive or will they start at 0 next year? No, it will, just so they're staggered terms, Henry, what we're suggesting is, you know, keep your board of directors until whenever the term limit is, right? So if your term limit is 5 years, honor that until you know, whenever their term limit would be, then that way it's a clean slate. And then the new board of directors that would be voted this year or next year, there would be then the 2-year terms. Okay, Abby, clarity and protocol on annual meeting and elections, quorums, minutes, recording of votes. So yes, we are providing policies and a template for the annual meeting, knowing that this is something that is new for a lot of you, whether it's election procedures, whether it's quorums, whether it's minutes, particularly on the quorum, right? Because if you were to base a 51% quorum on your active members, I think that would be a challenge for a lot of the chapters. What we're suggesting is take a look at, you will know this, right? From your historical data, you will know what your highest attendance is of your active members. Then what we're suggesting is probably deduct at least 20% of that. So I'll use Boston as an example, right? Because Boston is one of our larger chapters, or I think our larger chapters as far as active members. So let's just say they have 400 members. If we were to do the quorum that we're using for chapter board of directors, which is 51%, that means that they need to have 202 members present for the annual election of board of directors, right? We're not suggesting that it should be 51%. What we're suggesting is a number significantly less than that. If Boston can draw 200 people at their annual cruise, I would then use 200 and at least deduct 20% of that, right? So 160, 150, maybe, or maybe 120, and use that number as a quorum for your annual meeting so you could have elections. But we can provide some guidance as we continue to roll this out. All right, next question here. If someone is on the board for more than 6 years now in a row, when and how do you want us to approach them about this and the new limit, and do you advise? Okay, so Elsie, that's a great question. So right now, if someone is on the board for more than 6, depending on how you want to adopt the bylaws, right? Again, we want to make sure that it's minimal interruptions on how you govern your chapter. So if it's been more than 6 years, and depending on what your bylaws say, I think LA is probably one of the chapters that have a longer term limit on your bylaws. Is you might want to just ask them if they want to continue to serve. Now, I would be surprised if someone would want to serve beyond the 6 years, but again, you know, it really depends on how people want to serve. Is maybe do it on a case-by-case basis. and see if they're still interested. If not, they can take a break, right? Based on the current one that we have, you can take a break, and then after that 1-year break, you can run again as a board of director. But then again, that entirely depends on you and how you want to implement the bylaws moving forward. Going back to the previous answer that I had said, if it's, let's say, a 5-year term limit, kind of like honor that, just to make sure that people don't feel like they're being kicked out, or and have those private conversations. Then that way it's a, you're showing board of directors and your officers some respect on how they want to move forward. Okay. All right. Who comprises the board of directors? This was a question. Only directors. The board of directors are the ones that are elected to serve as your board of directors, Joyce. The officers would also be part of your board of directors. Okay. Tom, yes. No Milligan, Jim Wong. For you golfers out there, you know what I'm talking about. All right. Teresa, would you please clarify the relationship between the president and vice president and the board of directors? Are the president and vice president also members of the board, and should they cast? Yes. So you need to be a board of director first before you're an officer, right? And so think of it as your officer, your board of directors is composed of your officers plus 6 or 7 other board of directors that may not have the secretary, the treasurer, the vice president type of title. Not that they're less important than your officers. They're equally important, and they make up the composition of the entire board. So from the pool of your board of directors, right, you would then draw the election. So the board of directors actually will elect your officers. So if you think of it this way, your entire membership will vote on the board of directors. Once you have the pool of board of directors, those are the ones who are going to be voting on your officers. So your president, your vice president, your secretary, your treasurer, and your immediate past president make up the composition of your officers. And by virtue of that, they're part of your board. Should they cast votes as board members? Absolutely. When it's a decision that's made by the board, absolutely. Okay. Are there logistical requirements that is chapter required to send out X number of emails to notify all active members of the annual gen? Yes. So Cindy, that's a great question. At a minimum, you just need to notify and can pipe in when you can. You need to at least give, I think based on the bylaws, at least 48 hours notice that there's going to be an annual general meeting. And you can do that via email if you have all of your active members' emails, or I think, we're staying away from snail mail, right? It's expensive and all of that stuff. And again, it needs to go out to all of your active members. Ken, is that correct?
Actually, Hope, I think the bylaws says it's got to be at least 10 days, but in Sacramento, we give 30 days before an annual meeting just to be safe. But if it's a regular meeting, it has to be at least 10 days. For special board meetings, it has to be 48 hours. So, but I think it's best if you could give for an annual board meeting so they could get ready for elections 30 days, but our bylaws says 10 days.
Okay, great. All right, question here. Are we allowing proxy voting to make a quorum? So those are 2 different questions, Rommel, I think. So let me parse it out. The first part of your question is, are we allowing proxy voting? And I think it really depends on how your chapter wants to handle proxy voting. You need, if it's a chapter board of director meeting, you need to actually have a quorum to conduct business decisions, right? You can have a meeting without making any business decisions if you don't have a quorum, right, Ken?
You can have a meeting, but you can't vote, yes.
Yes, you can't conduct any, you can't make any business decisions, or you can't vote on stuff. Now, if you're asking for proxy voting on elections, we're going to provide guidance on that in the next couple of weeks, considering that we are in a pandemic. But proxy voting, you mean for other decisions? I think chapters have allowed this, and I think we have provision on the bylaws for proxy voting. So again, that's different from actually making a quorum, right? Proxy voting is, hey, you know, this so-and-so is a representative who's going to be sitting in for me. I don't know that that's actually something that counts toward a quorum, Ken, unless you're interpreting it differently.
And hope some states do not allow proxy voting for elections. And I think California is one of the states. So when we have our national elections for the national board, we don't allow any proxy voting. So I know we did not make that clear in this bylaws, and that's probably one thing we should do. But I do know some states don't allow proxy voting for elections.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. All right, Nick, yes, I believe it is being recorded. Dan, thank you for being ARIA for life. Stephen, how about sponsored members? Would that constitute a conflict of interest if they are sponsors? Ken, pipe in if you can on this one. So what we're saying is there's a difference between your, let's say, corporate board members, right, or corporate advisory. I don't want to even use board member. Corporate advisory, which sometimes or most often than not, they're composed of sponsor members, right, sponsored members. Now, if a sponsor wants to, let's say, run for a board of director, they're open to, I mean, as long as they're committed to doing everything that you want for them to do, meaning attending meetings, right? Working at events and all of that stuff, absolutely. Now, is there a conflict of interest? There could be, and that's why we have the conflict of interest policy, is that, you know, that we encourage all of the chapter boards to review that. And if there is a conflict of interest, then they need to disclose that.
Actually, a very good question, because under the IRS rules, if there's an appearance of conflict of interest, you could lose your nonprofit tax status. And we didn't put that in the model bylaws, but we have it in the national bylaws. For example, if you have a board of 10 and 5 work for sponsor Bank of X, then that's probably a conflict of interest. So, or if too many works, but we did not put that in the model bylaws, but we do have it in our national bylaws. So we will probably work on that. That's a good question.
Yeah, yeah. What we don't want to, and this has come up quite recently, is what we don't want to do is an appearance of pay to play, right? Meaning I'm going to give you a board seat, right? An actual chapter board seat because you are a sponsor, or the only way that you can get into the chapter board is to pay, right? To be a sponsor. That's going to be a no-no, right? If they legitimately want to be a board of director, by all means apply. And if they get voted in, that's fine. And as Ken had said, there are conflicts of interest that would need to be dealt with if we think that there is going to be either an implied or an implicit type of like conflict of interest. And Michelle, you're right, you can keep them as an advisor, right? Again, an advisor is very different from an actual board of director. Okay, question from Jacksonville. How long is our chapter term for new board members like me? So with the adoption of this new bylaws, Maria, it will be 2 years. Andy with the acknowledgement that many chapters have their own version of the bylaws. How is that reflected in this new bylaws moving forward? Will variations be allowed? Yes, absolutely. I think variations is going to be allowed. Again, this is a model chapter bylaws that we want for you guys to be using. There will be areas, and when Jessica sends this over, she will be indicating which areas can actually be modified. That way, you know, it can be modified depending on what your chapter situation is. All right. Is the past president automatically a director after their term? Yes. So the immediate past president is still part of your officer chain. So by virtue of that, they're still part of the board of director. Who votes for the board? So Elsie, what we're suggesting this time for the new bylaws is that all of your active members, again, you will know that, right? You have a roster of all of your board of all of your active members. They will be voting for all of your open slots for a board of directors. How do we campaign if members vote? Ken, are there restrictions on campaigning for board of directors?
I don't think we have any restrictions on campaigning, but you can't campaign during the election, during the voting time.
Yeah. Okay. Cindy, follow up from your question, which was the notice for the annual meeting. I think if you can demonstrate, the chapter has demonstrated that you have reasonably contacted your membership, whether it's 1 or 2 emails. I think that should be sufficient, as long as you have provided ample time, and Ken had indicated what that is, and then you've got proof that you've actually sent them the email. Now, whether or not they open that email is incumbent upon the recipient, right? For as long as you can prove that all of your active membership have received, or at least have been sent the emails. Okay, Conan from Boston. Do you need to be a licensed professional to serve as an executive board or board member? It really depends on how you want to actually, I guess, qualify your board of directors. For national, that is something that we put on the president, right? But it really is entirely up to you guys on, how you qualify your board of directors. What we do ask, though, is that if you're going to require them to be a licensed real estate professional, right, whether on the mortgage side or the lending side or the real estate side, is make sure that their license is not suspended, revoked, and all of that good stuff. Will the election process this year be virtual? Cheryl, more than likely it will be. If you're asking about the national election, there's 99% chances that it's going to be a virtual. And I think for the chapters too, it's safe to say that your election process is going to be virtual as well. Okay, Cindy, would you recommend each chapter create their own standing rule with the national standard bylaws? Not sure what the standing rule means, but you can call me right after so we can clarify that. Liza, yes, we will have a transcript of all of these questions. Chris Chen, can local chapters host their private educational webinars to educate their members and community without? Yeah, absolutely, Chris. So just for clarification, right? You are, each chapter of ARIA, you are your own independent entity, right? You govern yourselves, with guidance, obviously, from ARIA National, right? So the relationship that you have with ARIA National is that ARIA National has approved that chapter during its formation, and by virtue of that, you need to adhere to some guidelines. But from a governing standpoint, from a business operation standpoint, your conducting business like it's your own business. So you can have your educational webinars and kind of like host it on your own. You don't need nationals approval for it. Similar to your events, right? You plan for your events without nationals approval. Okay, what about past presidents? Carmen Chung, should there be a past president council to keep them engaged? That's up to you. Again, if you want a past president's council, right? If you want to create a committee to engage other board members, and so absolutely. I mean, you're more than welcome to make sure that you're not just the past presidents, right? But other board members who might have termed out, they can serve on committee roles. All right, Charles, what happens if there's no quorum on the annual meeting for the elections? Then you can't have, right? If there's no quorum, then you can't have the election. You can have an annual meeting, right? You can talk about the state of your chapter, but you can't have the elections. And that's why we do recommend that your quorum is not super, super low. You can't have a quorum that's like 10 active members, but make it so that the number should probably work to your advantage. I mean, again, your membership better than we do, so we will ask for you guys to actually set that number.
And also, Hope, what we've done in Sacramento in the past, we heavily advertised our general and election meeting. First, we make sure, I know it's probably not going to happen this year, it's going to be a Zoom meeting, but when we're not under lockdown, we make sure there's a lot of really good free food, because that brings people in. Yeah. And we bring top speakers, like the one we had last year. We had the state senator, state assembly members, and city council, the assistant vice mayor. They all spoke on relevant issues. So we make sure that we have a quorum on the general meeting for election. But Hope is right. If you don't have a quorum, then you can't do the election.
Yeah. All right. I think, Dan, your question regarding active member was answered by Tom. Ivan, wasn't 2014 the best year ever for ARIA? Yes, Ivan, because you were president or you were chair at that time. Okay. Any other questions?
I just want to clarify. It's 3 terms. It's 6 years. So a director can serve 6 years, and then they could take a break. They can be an advisor and then run again the year after that. So they can be a director or officer 6 years, not 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
And don't forget that your immediate past president role is also part of that term.
Okay. So question, any special language required for virtual Zoom voting? Again, if it's, Charles, if it's voting for your typical business type of like decision, kind of like transactions, then, it's sort of like your conference call board meetings, right? So nothing really special. It's when you're actually doing elections that would require actual signature as Ken, did you want to address that on the signature on the DocuSign and something that's faxed over?
So if it's a virtual meeting, if everyone can, if you can see everyone, then you don't probably need, that's fine. They can raise hands or they could say it there as long as you can see them. If you can't see them, there's been court cases saying that they're required to send their vote by fax, or they need to DocuSign it with a time and date stamp. But if they can be seen on the screen, that's fine. But if you can't see them, they have to send their vote by fax or DocuSign.
But Ken, that's assuming that it's not a secret ballot, right? Because elections, yes, unless people are comfortable saying, I'm voting for so-and-so.
Yes, that's correct.
So yeah. Charles, if people are comfortable saying who they're voting for, that's perfectly fine. But if it's a secret ballot, the way that we've done it in the past, then it needs to be, the signature is required. Okay, Liza, can a sponsor, sorry, I'm making sure that we have enough time. Can a sponsor be a president? If you're asking, can a sponsor of a chapter be a president? Now, we have a standing rule at National that they can't be working from a corporate standpoint, right? And I'll use, and I don't think Dion is going to mind this. Like Dion is with Citi. She is considered kind of like a corporate employee of Citi, right? So because of that, she's not allowed to run for president. And the reason for that is not because Dion is not capable, is because we don't want other partners to feel that the decisions of the board, particularly the president, that have obviously influence over the board, is going to be swayed by one direction towards one lender. That's the reason for why we have that rule. Now, it really depends on what you want to do as a chapter. So I think that we are going to exercise. Ken, what's your feeling on this one? I think it really depends on it's a case-by-case basis, is it not?
Yes, yes, that's correct. The important thing is to remember, is there an appearance of conflict? That's how the IRS would rule. If there's an appearance of conflict, then they shouldn't be.
Right. Okay, Cheryl, you're confused on how define an active member in our pool of membership pool. So an active member, just think of it as an active member is a dues paying member. So if they roll off on July 1st, then they're an inactive member, right? So active means dues paying. Can an advisory board member run for an executive position? Now, this is a little, I think, Martin, what you're asking for is, can a corporate advisory run for an executive position? But if they're part of the corporate advisory, they probably are not able to, because they're not a board of director. Unless they actually are a board of director, then they can run for an officer position. Are there term limits for chapter founder presidents after the second year term? I'm not sure. After the second year term, Michelle, after being a founding president, then according to the bylaws, you're not, you can't serve another consecutive term. Now, there's nothing in the bylaws that preclude you from running again after after you take a break. We've seen that in some chapters. Okay. Cheryl, the question was supposed to be in regards to the annual meeting that you mentioned. So Cheryl, I'll call you so that we can clarify that. All right. Any other questions? It looks like we've exhausted the chat box. Chica, we will be sending out the bylaws immediately after this meeting. All right, 4 minutes, guys. Any other questions? Ken, any other items that we needed to cover? It's a lot.
Maybe just that one, presidents or presidents don't vote during a board meeting unless there's a tie. So that's the only time the president votes. I think that's the one question that you had for me.
All right, so
opportunity, Hope, to just thank you for all your hard work and all of the staff, and Ken Avellino, you've always been there for us to help answer questions, to be a sounding board, so we appreciate you immensely. Thank you.
All right, I think now we turn it over to Narhi for the next portion of the program.
Yeah, thank you, Hope. Okay, so for all of our participants, I need you guys to just sit tight. We're going to do some magic here and get you guys into your breakout sessions and your forums.